Alright. So now we're down to 10 randos, plus the last 2 at the end. Hopefully neither of these are drops too. That would be awful if half of the shows that I picked as the end caps for this season were drops. Pretty confident that this won't be, but this one, who knows. But in any case, let's get back to our randos. We got 10 left. And what are we getting? 8. A Couple of Cuckoos. Oh boy. This one's gonna be a show. Let's give it a go.
Well, somehow I made it through 2.5 episodes of Cuckoos. I wasn't expecting to make it through 1, but here I am. Definitely not continuing it because all these characters are written by fucking space aliens, but I'll admit there are some parts of this show that I think are genuinely good. Mostly Erica being really cute. And also very dumb. She is probably the one bright spot in this show in that I genuinely, like, understand the appeal of her being cute and genuinely wholesome at some points. Although, most of the emotions really didn't land that well. Everyone else in this show is written fucking horribly. Like, it makes no goddamn sense most of the time, and it drives... Honestly, I think I made it 2.5 episodes in mostly out of fascination and curiosity as to where this show was going, because it's certainly not good. Well, maybe the first episode was, to some degree, but all of that, like, immediately drained away once these two actually started interacting within the premise of the show, of this arranged marriage thing. I can already tell the harem elements are going to fucking suck ass, because the Imoto who's actually not an Imoto is already in full cunt mode as soon as it's revealed that her not older brother is engaged to someone who is apparently her older sister. So she's gonna suck. The other romantic interest, I don't know enough about her at this point to say, because she hasn't had like more than 2 lines of dialogue at this point. But whatever. She doesn't seem that interesting. But again, Erica is pretty okay. Definitely not enough to carry this show, though, because the main dude is so all over the place in terms of quality that I just can't fucking stand him. All of the supporting cast fucking sucks ass. But you know what? I was also expecting this show to look like ass. And while it doesn't look amazing, it doesn't really look bad. It looks like a very slight step above average in some points. Although a lot of it is just average. But there are some moments that are genuinely above average. And I'll be honest, the music carries a lot of this too. Which, I believe the composer for this one is the same person who did Orbital Children and the latest Pokemon movie, Coco. And that had a pretty fucking banger soundtrack. Yeah, I can't recommend this one. I don't see this relationship developing in a very genuine way. Because the scenarios and the dialogue are just so fucking bonkers stupid. Yeah, let's move on.
Alright, Cuckoos is off the list. We're down to 9 now. Let's see what we roll next. Come on. 1. My Isekai Life, which I think is one of 2 isekai that are left in this list. Maybe 3, I'm not sure. Let's give it a go.
that might be the most boring isekai protagonist I've ever seen. I watched one episode of My Isekai Life, something something with a really long subtitle, purely because I was curious as to how the slime mechanics would work. The only reason I made it through the entire episode was because I was hoping I would at least get to see something interesting with these thousands of slimes that would make this show stand out. And I really didn't. There was some cool things. A couple, like some of the slimes cast magic. Some of them like moved really fast, and then he used them all to make a barrier. But that's all. It all seems like very base level stuff. Nothing that I would not have immediately thought of myself. And I was hoping for something a little more creative than that. Meanwhile, the main character has less than a personality. He is boring as shit. A literal piece of wood. He is awful. I hate him. And there is a particular point where his mana went into the negative. Also, minus 27 points for having actual stats in this fucking fantasy isekai. I hate that. I hate it. But his mana went into the negative at some point, with no explanation. I assume we'll get explanations at some point, but when I mean say into the negative, I mean vastly into the negative. So fuck that. You've completely destroyed all stakes. And the animation's not particularly good. It's not the worst thing ever, but I would call it like average or slightly below average. The girls are cute though, especially the little dryad girl. I like her. And also the town like guild secretary lady was pretty cute too. That's one thing I can give to these isekais. They always have cute girls. Most of the time. But, otherwise, this sucked ass. Let's move on.
Alright. Isekai Life off the list. Next is going to be... Nope. Down. 4. Extreme Hearts. Absolutely no clue what this is. Let's find out.
Well, I made it through an episode of Extreme Hearts, mostly on the goodwill of the guy who made it. This is what's the guy's name? Masaka Suzuki, I think is the guy's name. He's the Seven Arcs guy. He's basically the guy who is like at the center of Seven Arcs, the studio, which is a studio where you go, oh, you exist still. If you're not familiar, they're basically the ones who started the Lyrical Nanoha franchise, I believe. Yeah. So he's behind all of those series. He directed Vivid Strike, I believe, and he also did the Dog Days series, which I have not seen, so I can't speak to that. But I do like Nanoha quite a bit. Can't say I particularly like this though. It's got some interesting ideas, I guess. The extreme sports idea is kind of cool, and I do like the technology in this, the different sports equipment. In particular, the fact that you could just rent AI to train with, like AI robot, like teammates to train with, that was kind of cool. But the characters aren't that interesting. One character, Saki, is just outright bad. It's melodrama for the sake of melodrama, and I'm not against melodrama, but it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense in this situation. It just seems like they put in an emotional outburst just to have one. And the soccer game, at the end of this episode makes no goddamn sense. For one, Kiori, our lead character, is just using the AI on her team, which apparently is like a thing you can do, but and then they just end up getting crushed by the other team, which is like, yeah, I guess that's kind of obvious. Like, why would you even... First of all, why would you even bother letting someone play with multiple AI? But then, Saki and the other girl in this episode, whose name I forget, just sub in at some point as a surprise anyway, and it's like, wait, were you even registered on the team? Is this allowed? What the fuck is going on? The soccer match doesn't make any goddamn sense. It's also not particularly good looking. There's some cool cuts now and then, but the character designs are not great. The color design could definitely use some work. Soundtrack is generic as hell. Generic ass sports soundtrack. The only reason I got through this first episode is I was curious as to what the 7 Arcs guy was doing now. And apparently it's something not all that impressive. So let's move on.
Alright. Extreme Hearts off the list. Down to 7 randos now. Let's see what the next one is. 1. My stepmom's daughter is my ex. Okay, the not incest one. Let's give it a go.
Alright, I just finished all of My Stepmom's Daughter is My Ex. Had a pretty fun time with that one. The premise was so unique for a rom-com that I was already interested in it. Like, it's rare enough that we get relationships in rom-coms, and I guess this one technically doesn't have a relationship in the present day in it, but it's about the aftermath of a relationship fallout. I mean, it's about, again, it's 2 step-siblings who dated before their parents got married. And so a lot of the series is them kind of coming to terms with the unsettled feelings that they still were dealing with after the relationship fallout. Stuff that didn't really get concluded neatly and stuff like that. And it was pretty fun to watch. It was a surprise in a lot of ways, not all, but in a lot of ways, it was a surprisingly mature rom-com in terms of the emotions that are being addressed in it. Like, it was not a very clean breakup, and in a lot of ways, these two still very much have feelings for each other, which definitely comes back at the end, where it's basically like, hey, maybe do we want to try this again? I know Yume definitely wants to try it again. Not sure about Mizuto yet. But I wouldn't mind a second season of it. I don't think it's super necessary, but I wouldn't mind it. I found most of the characters pretty charming and engaging overall. Not in particular the main 2, just immediately, like within the first 3 to 4 episodes, already some of the most well-developed anime characters that I've seen from a rom-com. Just immediately, just a lot of very interesting details about their characters, how they interact with other people, how they view themselves, the little nuances about their personalities. It's just so incredibly dense and in a very surprising way, and it made these characters very interesting to follow. Made them feel very fleshed out and like real people. And in a way, they are a lot more real than a lot of other anime characters because they have been in a relationship. They have gone through that point in their lives. They have that experience under them, and it actually feels like they have that experience. It feels very real in a lot of sense. Now, there are some moments where I feel like personalities might have shifted too quickly. I get a little bit of that in like the post-breakup scene stuff with Yume, where it feels like post-breakup she is very much a notably different person than she was when she was in a relationship with Mizuto. I think, is it Mizuto or Mizuno? I don't remember. The dude. I'm bad with names. That one's not a huge example of that. What is a huge example of that is what they do to Higashira in episode 7. I love Higashira as a character. She is a perfect example of just a platonic friend of the opposite sex. For the most part, she is still into Mizuto. But she would have probably been content with just being his friend, being a really close friend of his. And that's why I find episode 7 to be so kind of weird and off-putting, because basically she kind of gets railroaded into trying to be in a relationship with Mizuto by the other two girls, by Yume and, what was it, Akatsuki? I don't remember her name. The fucking gremlin. But, and I was just watching episode 7 this whole time, and the whole time I'm just going, this sucks. What are we doing? Like, this... And I'm glad that this only lasted for, like, an episode before it went back to being, like, she got her confession over with, and it's like, yeah, I'll just go back to being just his friend then. And I think Higashira is just so cool for just being a normal fucking person when it comes to interacting with other people. Perhaps not the most high schoolish, and perhaps not the most realistic for a high schooler. They do kind of make a big deal of her not conforming to like the social norms of how a high school girl is supposed to act around the person that she has a crush on. But it was definitely very refreshing. I don't know if any of the characters took the lesson from that they needed to, but it was refreshing nonetheless. And by that I mean, she has the most healthy relationships with all of the different characters in the show, and I don't think any of the other characters understand that. So, that might be a little unfortunate. Oh well, she's still a great character. I do think it's kind of funny that they forgot about the guy friend character for like half the series. Like, I think the last time he shows up in like episode 4, his last appearance before the end of the series, like the very last scene of the series, is like episode 4 or 5, I think. And like, he's just completely missing for the back half of the series, and it's like, I couldn't tell if I missed him or not. But around episode 11, I was like, hey, where's that other guy at? Is he not important enough to be here? I guess not. And then he showed up at the very end. But, yeah, he was fine. I will admit this show does walk a very fine line between engaging with the super tropey nature of anime in a fun way and just pointing out that the tropes exist. Like, it's kind of obvious that a lot of the characters are super into light novels, as evidenced by the fact that you see them reading light novels constantly. a lot of times light novels that we as anime fans will be familiar with. Like, sorry, it's a little late when I'm recording this. Haganai shows up a couple times because it's the friendship rom-com. The detective is already dead, I think, shows up at some point. And then the one that hurts the most is when Higashira holds up what she says is a really old light novel, and it's The Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya. And that one hurt. I feel old. But yeah, it's pretty obvious that the characters themselves are into anime tropes and light novel tropes, so it doesn't feel super intrusive when they bring them up. So for the most part, I'm fine with that element, but it does get a little over the top sometimes. And in general, I found this to be a mostly pleasant series overall in terms of tone. The jokes were never really like gut-bustingly hilarious, but they didn't really fall flat either. Like, I never was sitting there like groaning the whole time. It was a pleasant series overall. Though I wish the visuals were a bit stronger. This is not a particularly great looking series. It's not bad looking. Well, there are some moments that don't look that are kind of bad. But overall, probably the strongest showing that Project Number 9 has made so far, which is not a high bar to reach, but they reached it. The character designs are pretty solid, if super basic. The moments of fan service where it actually tried to like be sexy were genuinely appealing. Has a decent color palette, although sometimes the flashback sequences has some weird texturing to some of the backgrounds in not very noticeable ways. So minor nitpick there, but overall it's a super average looking series. Not a whole lot of ambition or creativity in terms of presentation all around. So that would have definitely helped a lot with some of the slower moments of the series. But it could have been worse, I guess. Overall, had a fun time with this one. I think it could have gone a little... Actually, no, I don't think it could have gone a little bit deeper. I think it digs into a lot of really interesting emotions that you rarely see in anime, and does so in a very thoughtful way most of the time. Sometimes there are some very out-of-character moments that just seem to be there for the sake of being there. But I had a pleasant time with this anime. Now let's go figure out where I want to put it on the list.
Alright, My Stepmom's Daughter Is My Ex is complete. And we're going to put it, where is it? We're going to put it right here in between Rose King and Subikui Bisco. And you get a light 7. I had a fun time. So, next, time for another random. We have one more before we jump down to the bottom of the list again. So we got 6 randoms left. Let's see what we get. It is 6. Fuuto PI. Some kind of detective show, I guess. Let's give it a go.
You know, there was a lot of things I was expecting to see from this season of anime, but I can definitively say that a Kamen Rider anime was not one of those things. So I got 2 episodes into Fuuto PI, or Fuuto Detective, Fuuto Tante, whatever you want to call it. It was definitely interesting. So this is apparently a sequel to Kamen Rider W, or Kamen Rider Double, I guess. And it definitely feels like a Kamen Rider from the very little bit of Kamen Rider that I've seen. And in that regard, it is kind of interesting. The monster designs are very unique. Kamen Rider does look kind of cool in animation. Definitely very CG heavy, but I mean, that's Kamen Rider as well, so it's a tokusatsu series, and it's actually not all that bad CG. Could be a little better in some spots, but it does make use of some, it does use that CG to some interesting effects. Like in the first episode, there's a prolonged first-person sequence of someone walking up the stairs, and the way that the CG allows the camera to move around to express the character's emotions in that state is pretty interesting. Unfortunately, all of the characters are super flat and boring, and I don't care about any of them. There's nothing to them outside of like single personality traits, and they're not particularly interesting personality traits either. The main detective guy, Shotaro, he's just not fun and not interesting. And he immediately falls in love with the suspect of one of his cases because she's hot. Now granted, she is really hot, and the anime does make her really hot. But it's not interesting. And none of the other characters are interesting. It seems like it's going to be semi-episodic. Like I think the first case lasts 3 episodes. I only got through 2 of those episodes because I was so bored by the characters. But I guess if you've seen Kamen Rider Double, give this anime a shot. But otherwise, I see no reason to continue watching because I'm just so bored.
Alright, Fuuto PI is off the list. And that brings us down to this section, these end caps at the end here. We're going to try out Lycoris Recoil. Heard a lot of good things about this one as like a real fun action series. So let's give it a go.
Alright, I just finished all of Lycoris Recoil in a single evening, no less. I was going to break this up over 2 days because I thought I was going to be too tired to finish it, but man, this show was so damn good that I just binged all of it right away, and I had a hell of a good time. Man, there is a surprising amount of stuff to talk about with this show. Despite it, on the surface, being a pretty straightforward, like, action, assassin-y kind of thriller series. But I do think that is the main appeal of it. This is just a pretty traditional action series. Almost a little Western in a sense. And on that front, it is really good. There are some points near the end where it feels like it kind of brushes over a couple things that might seem a little unbelievable, but like the public just immediately going back to, oh, I guess this was just a publicity stunt. I can kind of see that working, but I think that they didn't dwell on it long enough for me. They didn't dwell on it long enough for it to be believable, but they also didn't dwell on it long enough to make you think too hard about it not being believable. So that's really the only like big like, oh, this feels like a plot contrivance kind of thing, because otherwise Pretty straightforward, a little cheesy in some ways, but it's hella satisfying how it incorporates a lot of the big dumb action movie kind of tropes into it. But that's just really the base layer of it. There is a surprising amount of depth to this series once you really start to peel back the layers on it. In particular, like, we have the main premise of the show, this secret organization that keeps Japan safe in secret by basically just carrying out covert hit operations on potential terrorists. On the one hand, yeah, I think the lack of due process is a little bit yikes, but also all of the people we see on screen are very obviously like people with ill intent who are basically terrorists, so it never really brings up, I think if we had like a 2-core series, I think we could have brought up the potential for like, hey, this might be a little bit unethical. But I think that question kind of had to get cut out for this single core, despite it being like a full single core. This is 13 episodes, and it makes use of all of that space for character building, for plot, for world building. It's an incredibly fast-paced series. Very rarely a moment of like nothing interesting is happening. Like, even the slice of life moments are interesting in a lot of ways, and we'll get to those in a little bit. But aside from the premise of the show, we have kind of the counter argument to the premise of the show, which is Chisato herself as this kind of forceful pacifist in a way. Not pacifist. She's a no-kill assassin, is what it turns out to be. And because she's so damn good at it, she is essentially the best in her field. She has that option. She has the option to take down enemies non-lethally and have them potentially learn from their mistakes, or just potentially not have them as an enemy in the future. Like, I think in one of the earlier episodes, she points out, like Takina is like, these guys were the enemy, and Chisato's like, well, they were the enemy today. And that was just the matter-of-factness of this that kind of struck a chord with me. It was like, oh yeah, these guys are just mercenaries, essentially. They're not like ideological terrorists or anything. These are just like hired thugs. So in that sense, I could see this uber pacifism working to a certain degree. And so I think the balance between those two opposing forces in the series was kind of interesting, and seeing everyone else's take on it was also just really interesting. And I think that's another thing that really propelled this series forward for me, is just how interesting and how fun all of the characters are. Like, you can have a big dumb action series and with really bland characters. Again, the series I watched before this, or attempted to watch before this, was Fuuto PI. The action in that was fun, and the thriller elements were pretty fun, but the characters were super bland and unengaging, and I just didn't care about them, so I only made it like 2 episodes into that. Whereas with this show, every single character is so fun and surprisingly complex and full of life, and just so enjoyable to watch on screen, both as individual characters and as how they relate to all the other characters. Just the way that, like, this cast is so damn good and memorable. I'm gonna be thinking about this cast for a while, I think. Hopefully. Chisato is just this bundle of sunshine and joy, almost to a ditzy degree. contrasted with the cold strictness of Takina. Again, super cheesy and tropey, but the way that they execute these tropes, the specific type of language they use, the way they interact with each other visually is just so fun and immensely gay. This show is extremely gay. There's not a lot of there's no romance in the show. Well, you could argue that there is a lot of romantic elements between Mika and Shinji, which is this like these older men in the series, and that kind of like if I had not seen this passed around on Twitter several months ago, this would have completely taken me by surprise. I'm like, an older essentially gay couple in an anime, almost unheard of, especially in like an action series like this. And the conflict that they have over Chisato's place in the world was extremely compelling, compounded by their very tricky relationship. And then of course you have Chisato and Takina, not as explicit as Mika and Shinji, but I would say it's pretty much there. And if you read some of the production notes from people who are like, well, what happens after the show? I think it's pretty clear that the people making this show think that as well. By the way, this is made by, I think, Shingo Adachi, I believe. I forget some of the other stuff that he's made, but he's been a pretty big player in the anime industry. I know he did the character designs for Pompo the Cinephile, which is awesome in my book. Those are some stellar character designs. Yeah, I definitely want to check out more of everything that this guy has made based on this series. But jumping back to the characters, that's another cool thing about this series, is just the different layers of theming and how all this stuff works together. Like, we have this concept of Chisato, her talent being that she is extremely good at killing people. Or she could be extremely good at killing people. But instead, she uses her talents just to incapacitate people. And the conflict over, well, this is your talent, this idea of it's a very utilitarian view of you should use your talent solely for the purpose of making the world better, but then on the other hand you have this thing of, well, Chisato doesn't want to kill people. She doesn't need to. And so she kind of rejects this role for herself because it's her decision to make. And there's a lot of choice in this series. There's a lot of focus on choice, the ability to choose a path for yourself in life. And that definitely made a lot of the character motivations really compelling and a lot of the character interactions really interesting. As well as like Takino's side as well. She constantly chooses to disobey orders even though she knows it's going to be bad for her, so that she can better help the people around her. Although that is another one part of the series where I just don't think the series quite nailed it. Like, the opening incident of this series is that Takina basically flies off the handle a little bit during a mission and just sprays down a bunch of enemies, almost killing one of her teammates in the process, and essentially killing the lead that they had for this arms deal. And the show really tries to soften how much of this incident was Takina's fault, which I don't quite agree with. It's like, yeah, you disobeyed orders that could have gotten your teammate killed. You could have killed your teammate yourself, And also, you set the mission back at least a whole day. And I don't think the show goes quite as hard on giving Makima or Takina fault as it could have. It does to some degree, especially like later on in the series, but I think it could have gone a little harder on that. But yeah, just aside from that, just really stellar characterization all around. Like even in the, again, the slice of life moments really flesh out these characters in some really interesting and really fun ways. Like this is gonna sound weird for people who haven't seen it, but the panty debacle in episode 4 was just really fun. It's way less perverted than it sounds if you haven't seen it. And also that episode was directed by and storyboarded by Tetsuya Takeuchi, who's again another big name animator in the field, a legendary animator. If you've seen Demolition D's video on Yuri Seijin Naoko-san, he puts a lot of emphasis on Tetsuya Takeuchi in that video because he was the director for that. And speaking of that, and speaking of the animation, holy fuck, this series is beautiful. This is by far one of the most well-produced series of 2022. It is gorgeous. It's fucking really strong character designs. I forgot who did the character designs for this one, but it's by the manga artist who did that what was it? That Art Club anime from a few years ago. I think it was like, God, that was over 5 years ago now, I think, actually. But they did the character designs for that. Absolutely incredible character designs all around. And I didn't even bring this up. Mika, the Chisato's teacher, is a black dude. Like, just full-on black dude with, like, dreads and everything. I'm like, damn. You just put that in there with no stereotypes surrounding it whatsoever. Good on you, Japan. Good on you. We're finally learning. We are finally learning. Awesome, cool rep for a cool character. But yeah, solid character designs all around. Just the action scenes are so fucking good. They're so tight. Choreography is incredible. The animation is incredible in these action scenes. I think there was only like maybe a couple moments in some of the earlier episodes where there was a shot that looked kind of iffy in like some of the more static moments, but otherwise this series is just incredibly beautiful. Really strong character acting, really strong set design, and just facial expressions. This is a damn near perfect production. I don't like using the word perfect all that much, but this is, visually speaking, one of the strongest productions I've seen all year. I guess I'm recording this in 2023 now, but from all of 2022, this is one of the strongest productions I've seen. It's just so damn good. They really, some of the character designs do feel like very fresh and unique, but a lot of the character designs just feel like the most refined versions of standard character designs that you could think of. Like Takina, super basic, like long black haired, cool beauty anime girl. But she probably has the most refined version of that design that I've seen in a very long time, possibly ever. Just super tight in all the right air. Just so... This show's so fucking good, man. even down to the fucking music is just so, this hard rock bordering on metal in certain areas with the action scenes, and then it's got some really nice, relaxing, almost goofy kind of stuff in the more lighthearted scenes. And apparently this is the guy who did this has one other anime music credit, and it's for Sancho Sanyo, which is a soundtrack that I have used as background music several times in my videos, and it sounds nothing at all like this series. So I would not have seen that parallel in a million years. Yeah. This show is sorry, it's well past midnight by the time I'm recording this, because I binged this whole series in a single day after work. I know this fucking good show. Apparently the plot was contentious with a lot of people. Honestly, I don't get how. It seems like a pretty standard, like, espionage action thriller. Some of the elements could have used a little tightening up, but the plot as a whole was pretty solid, and I totally bought into. It's a little bit unbelievable in certain areas, but and that's another thing. There is so much on a sociological level. There are some really interesting ideas, like the thing that kicks off the big bad guy's plan, Majima, is he plants a bunch of guns randomly around Tokyo, and a guy, like, just a random civilian pulls one out of a bag, and he, like, just fumbles around with it, and a police officer shoots him because he thinks he's about to get shot at. Which I'm like, wow, based. That's all I can say, based. And it's like little stuff like that where it really has a very interesting, borderline woke worldview in certain areas, while still being an incredibly solid, like, espionage thriller action series. This one's just really solidly paced, solidly acted, just solidly characterized. I really like this show. Now let's figure out where I put this on the list.
Alright, Lycoris Recoil is done, and we're gonna move it all the way up here, just barely on the edge of the top 10, and you get a decent 8. That was some damn good action.